Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Exploring Poverty, People Matter. I'm one of your hosts, Tolu.
And I'm Grace, your other host.
So let's get into it, Grace. What are we trying to do here today?
We're going to talk about quite a lot of things, so bear with us. But the overarching question for our episode is how should we define and measure poverty today?
A loaded question if I've ever seen one, but we have a loaded answer for that, don't we, Grace?
Yes, we do. And here it goes. Taking into account the multidimensional problem poverty is, we should define poverty as not having enough resources and substantial freedoms to live a minimally decent and dignified life. We should measure poverty by combining the SPM and MPI.
What a mouthful. But don't worry, by the end of this episode, you'll be reciting this like the back of your hands. But a quick disclaimer here. This is how we, Grace and I, believe poverty should be defined and measured. This does not mean that all other measures and definitions are wrong. Now that that's out of the question, let's dive into breaking down our definition. The first part of our thesis is as follows: taking into account the multidimensional problem poverty is.
Why is that part of the thesis so important?
Well, the thing is, Grace, we can't talk about poverty like it could fit into a box, as though each person experiencing poverty is going through the exact same issues. That's why, in any definition, we have to take into account the multidimensionality of poverty.
Yeah, and I'm sure we could agree on the magnitude of that statement. It's like an admission to ourselves and to everyone else that, hey, we know poverty is complex and we're doing our best to define and measure it, but we also know that there's so much more we could be missing.
Exactly my thoughts. Which leads us to the next part of our thesis. We should define poverty as not having enough resources and substantial freedoms. We'll stop there for now because it may not look like it, but there's a whole lot to unpack right there.
So, what are resources?
Resources are the essential things humans need to survive. Currently, there are things like food, clothing, shelter, utilities, telephone, and internet.
There are so many ways to measure somebody's ability to get their essential resources. There's the extreme poverty measure, which, as its name implies, measures extreme poverty. Its threshold is $2.15 per person per day. The relative poverty measure sees if a household makes less than 50% of the median income in their society.
The official poverty measure measures a household income compared to three times the price of a thrifty food basket, around $30. And the SPM does so much more.
The SPM measures resources in annual pre tax income, government programs, government physical money, and non cash benefits while accounting for family size and expenses. It's our favorite income based measure.
Going off these income measures, some believe that all a person needs to be considered impoverished is the lack of basic resources. Actually, ChatGPT said poverty has traditionally been defined in economic terms, focusing on income thresholds such as the poverty line or consumption levels. This measures whether individuals have sufficient financial resources to meet basic needs like food, housing, and healthcare.
And we believe that that's true. We believe those in extreme poverty lack these basic resources. But the key word here is extreme. We believe in a bigger umbrella for poverty where people lack their substantial freedoms as well.
But what does it mean to not have enough substantial freedoms? Why is our definition of poverty different from ChatGPT's?
To explain this, we have to turn to our friend Nussbaum and her capabilities approach.
What are capabilities? Well, they are defined as a total set of beings and doings that a person is actually able to do. Functionings are the actual beings and doings a person chooses to achieve. Nussbaum believes that to uphold a person's dignity, they need to have 10 central capabilities.
And those are life, bodily health, bodily integrity, senses, imagination, emotions, practical reason, affiliation, other species, play, and control over one's environment.
Grace, you make me laugh so much. Anyways, a student of Nussbaum developed a way to measure the capabilities approach called the Multidimensional Poverty Index, the MPI. The MPI measures a person's overall well being across three broad categories: health, education, and standard of living.
This is our favorite non monetary measure.
Now, Nussbaum isn't saying they need to have all these 10 capabilities in full. They just need enough to live a minimally decent and dignified life. As she put it, the capabilities approach is focused on choice or freedom. We consider a person to be experiencing poverty when they don't have the choice or freedom to educate themselves, take a day off for their mental and emotional health, or have autonomy.
Now you're probably thinking, why should a household that has enough resources but not enough substantial freedoms be considered impoverished? They're able to satisfy their basic needs.
Well, we believe that poverty as a whole means not having enough substantial freedoms and resources to live a minimally decent and dignified life. People who lack these fundamental resources, the FCSUTI, are experiencing poverty, but their struggles should not override the struggles of others. That's why we believe. That's why we would categorize this lack of resources as extreme poverty instead of poverty. This allows us to focus on these two very real problems in different ways.
To add on to that, not categorizing people who have basic resources but not basic freedoms as impoverished ignores what they lose out on to obtain these resources. They may not have the freedoms to take a day off or get higher education.
Think of a single mother working day and night just to make ends meet. We would consider her household impoverished because she does not have a minimally decent and dignified life.
A minimally decent and dignified life. You've heard this phrase a lot in this episode, and it's kind of our main point. A person experiencing poverty to us does not have a minimally decent and dignified life.
We're not saying they should be Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. We're also not saying they should never experience any hardships or that they have to max out all 10 central capabilities. What we are saying is they need to have all these capabilities to a sufficient amount where they can have a minimally decent and dignified life.
Dignity is the sense of pride or self-respect. As long as a person can have enough resources and substantial freedoms to respect themselves and others, then they're not experiencing poverty.
Now, you might be thinking of a very rich CEO who has more money than they know what to do with, but they're still missing one of the central capabilities. Let's say playing, because they work all the time.
In that scenario, we would tell you that the person has made the choice not to play. The ability to choose is essential in the situation. As long as you don't have the freedom or choice to do certain things, then you're experiencing poverty. The CEO has the choice to stay at work and to not play. The single mother we mentioned before doesn't.
Another philosopher that brings up a very valid point while disagreeing with us is Rector. Rector makes the argument that the typical poor American household, as defined by the US Census Bureau, has a car and air conditioning, two color televisions, cable or satellite TV, a DVD player, a VCR, and more living space than a non poor European has.
And I admit, he brings up a really good point. The majority of people that the US government decides as poor are not unhoused. They don't lack shelter and they don't lack nutrition.
But our point is, we don't know how these people are getting their amenities and resources. We don't know if they're struggling to make ends meet or relying on government support to stay above the threshold of not satisfying basic needs. If any of these things are true, these people are not getting the minimal freedoms that make life worth living. We would say they're still experiencing poverty, even though they don't need any more basic resources to survive.
Also, with Rector's argument, we don't know the people's health or education. Can they visit the doctor if they need to, or do they have the educational background to be able to think critically?
While we don't completely agree with it, Rector's point is valid, and it just brings us back to the distinction we made earlier. There are people experiencing extreme poverty and people under the big umbrella of poverty. The people Rector refers to may not be experiencing extreme poverty, but they are experiencing a poverty of substantial freedoms, whether it be their bodily health and integrity, education, play. Any substantial lack of these basic freedoms affects their ability to live a minimally decent and dignified life.
So, once again, here's our answer to the question: how should we define and measure poverty today?
Taking into account the multidimensional problem of poverty, we should define poverty as not having enough resources and substantial freedoms to live a minimally decent and dignified life. We should measure poverty by combining the SPM and the MPI.
And as a reminder, the SPM measures pre tax annual income, non cash, near cash, and in kind benefits, while the MPI measures some of the basic capabilities people have concerning health, education, and standard of living. Well, Tolu, it's been a long episode. How should we wrap this up?
Simple grace. People matter.
I could not have said it better than myself. Thank you all for listening. See you next time.
Peace out.